Part 22. The Prince Longs for Me Every Night After Mastering Thought Reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 211. Han Yan raised his cold eyes to look at Xiao Jinyu. Prince Yu cares about His Highness very much. Of course, he is my brother. I won't talk to you anymore. I'm going to find my sister-in-law. Xiao Jinyu handed the big and small bags in his hand to his subordinates and left with a folding fan. Han Yan looked at Xiao Jinyu's back as he left, and a complicated look flashed in his eyes. Shen Shuwei woke up after sleeping for an hour this time, mainly because she was thirsty. She drank some water and couldn't fall asleep, so she simply got up and went out to bask in the sun. The afternoon sun was bright and the breeze was gentle. Shen Shuwei's butt was not warm yet, and she saw Xiao Jinyu walking over with a folding fan in her hand and a smile on her face. "Sister-in-law, are you basking in the sun?" Shen Shuwei lay lazily, her voice was also very lazy. "Are you basking in the sun too?" When Xiao Jinyu heard the voice, he couldn't help but worry. "Sister-in-law, what's wrong with your throat? Are you uncomfortable?" Shen Shuwei made up a lie. "I ate spicy soup last night and my throat is spicy." Xiao Jinyu kindly reminded, "Sister-in-law, eat less spicy soup in the future. Your voice is like a duck's voice. If my brother doesn't like it, you will be miserable." Xiao Jinyu was raised in the deep palace since she was a child, and she knew too well how important pampering is to a woman. A woman's beauty and body shape are very important. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyu with a faint look. "Why did I become a duck's voice?" "It's your brother's fault. If he dislikes it, it's fine, and I don't need to be so tired." Xiao Jinyu only felt a chill on his back. He raised his folding fan to try to cover it. "Sister-in-law, you look at me like this, I'm so scared." Shen Shuwei stared at Xiao Jinyu fiercely. "I see that you are very angry recently." Xiao Jinyu was very surprised and embarrassed when he heard it. "How did sister-in-law know?" Shen Shuwei smiled. "Isn't it written on your face?" His face was full of dissatisfaction. Xiao Jinyu was very embarrassed when his sister-in-law saw it. These days, Miss Han always flirted with him at every turn, and then left after flirting, leaving him alone to feel uncomfortable and want to roll around. Once or twice is fine, but who can stand it if it happens too many times? Xiao Jinyu came over, squatted in front of Shen Shuwei, and asked in a low voice, "Sister-in-law, is there a solution?" Shen Shuwei took a sip of tea. "Marrying a concubine can solve the permanent problem." Xiao Jinyu wilted directly. He didn't have the idea of marrying a concubine yet, so this method didn't work. At the time of lighting, Xiao Jinyan took Shen Shuwei to the lively snack street as promised. Wei Qi and Qin Xiao followed from a distance. Xiao Jinyan glanced at the busy snack street, where people were coming and going. She turned her head to look at Shen Shuwei and asked, "What do you want to eat?" Shen Shuwei had eaten hulatang last night, and she had been thinking about it all day today, so it was natural that she said, "I want to eat hulatang." Xiao Jinyan heard hulatang for the first time, and she didn't know what it was. She wanted to eat it, so she nodded and agreed, "Okay." Shen Shuwei had been to the hulatang stall once yesterday, and she roughly remembered where it was. She pulled Xiao Jinyan's sleeve and walked towards the stall she remembered. Xiao Jinyan lowered her eyes and looked at the hand that was pulling her sleeve. His hand was clearly there, but she always pulled his sleeve. Is it not good to hold his hand? Shen Shuwei's attention was on the stalls on both sides. Seeing the hulatang stall from a distance, she pointed at the stall and turned her head to tell Xiao Jinyan, "Master, it's in front." Xiao Jinyan followed her line of sight and saw a stall with a full table of people, doing good business. He brought Shen Shuwei to the stall. Shen Shuwei took out a handkerchief and wiped the table and chairs, then let Xiao Jinyan sit down, and then sat down himself. Before Shen Shuwei spoke, the proprietress recognized Shen Shuwei. "Young master, are you here to eat spicy soup again?" Shen Shuwei was a little surprised. "Boss, there were so many customers yesterday, do you still remember me?" The proprietress said happily, "Of course, although there are many customers every day, this is the first time I have seen such a handsome boy like you, and I can't forget it after seeing it." Xiao Jinyan listened to the proprietress's words and looked at Shen Shuwei. Her little face was delicate like a porcelain doll. Her appearance was indeed fascinating and hard to forget. He frowned. Shen Shuwei couldn't help laughing, and turned to ask Xiao Jinyan, "Master, do you want to eat hulatang? It's a bit spicy." Xiao Jinyan shook his head when he heard it was spicy. "No, you should eat less." Shen Shuwei didn't force it, and turned to look at the proprietress again. "I want a bowl of hulatang." "Okay, please wait a moment, sir." The proprietress held a clean bowl in one hand and a long spoon in the other, and neatly served a bowl of hulatang. "The guest is here." The proprietress happily placed the steaming hot hulatang in front of Shen Shuwei. "Please enjoy it slowly, sir." After that, she went back to work. Shen Shuwei smelled the fragrance of hulatang, and couldn't wait to pick up the spoon and scoop the hulatang to his lips and blew it, and then put it into his mouth. Usually the temperature is just right for eating, but this time it was so hot that she frowned. "It's so hot." "Can't you eat slower?" Xiao Jinyan said as he stood up and poured a glass of cold water. "Drink some cold water." Shen Shuwei brought the teacup to her mouth and took 2 sips. Xiao Jinyan said again, "Eat slower, no one is going to snatch it from you." Shen Shuwei put down the cup and said guiltily, "I know." She picked up the spoon again and scooped up the spicy soup, blowing on it for a long time before she dared to eat it. Xiao Jinyan looked at her eating and was a little absent-minded. He felt more than once that Shen Shuwei seemed to have seen the way she ate before. Before Shen Shuwei entered the palace, he had never seen her. The previous Shen Shuwei was not like this, not a foodie, but a woman who was ambitious and wanted to seduce him. Why did he feel so familiar? It took Shen Shuwei a long time to finish a bowl of spicy soup, and she wiped her mouth with satisfaction. "Your Highness, let's go to the next one." Xiao Jinyan already knew what the next one meant. Since he agreed to let her out, of course he had to let her eat enough. She was actually very easy to satisfy. After Wei Qi paid the money, he heard Qin Xiao say, "Brother, I really think the master is too good to Brother Shen," and even poured him water. Wei Qi nodded, "It's indeed a bit too good." Qin Xiao said in surprise, "You think so too, right?" Wei Qi nodded vigorously, "Your Highness is too loyal." Qin Xiao. Shen Shuwei ate and drank enough and bought some snacks and went back. Xiao Jinyan accompanied her throughout the whole process. In the past, Xiao Jinyan felt that accompanying women was a waste of time. Now he feels that accompanying Shen Shuwei is also a kind of relaxing enjoyment. When going to bed at night, Shen Shuwei's body is still a little sore, thinking that it will be better after a good sleep. Looking at Xiao Jinyan who suddenly came over, she subconsciously moved inside. Xiao Jinyan looked at her actions and asked in confusion, "Why are you hiding? There are more updates. Please vote. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 212. Shen Chu raised his eyes slightly and looked at Xiao Jinyan. Those twinkling phoenix eyes were looking at him unblinkingly, which made people feel very unsure. "Your Highness, I'm not hiding," he said harshly. Xiao Jinyan glanced at the distance between the two and said, "If you hadn't hid, why would you be so far away from me?" Shen Shuwei argued, "Didn't we always sleep like this before? Why not this time?" Xiao Jinyan stared at her for a while without explaining. "Come here." People under the eaves have to bow their heads. Shen Shuwei moved closer to Xiao Jinyan, and pressed her aching body against Xiao Jinyan's body. As soon as she got closer, she felt the body temperature transmitted from his body was very hot. She felt that Xiao Jinyan was even more angry than Xiao Jinyu. Xiao Jinyan turned sideways and stretched out his arms to hold her in his arms. With such a beautiful woman in his arms, it was inevitable that he would feel a little emotional. He lowered his head and kissed her lips. Xiaju. Shen Chu called out softly, "Your Highness." "No, didn't you go to bed last night?" Everyone would be jealous of Xiao Jinyan's physical strength and energy. Xiao Jinyan corrected him, "When no one is around, call me Jinyan. You are His Highness the Crown Prince, it is not good to call her by your first name." She thought back to when she called out Xiao Jinyan angrily, and Chengzi had to educate her for a long time. The ancient system of honor and inferiority was very strict. It would not be an exaggeration to say that calling the prince by his first name would be treasonous. Xiao Jinyan said, "There are no outsiders now, so why can't we complain?" Shen Chu blinked his beautiful big eyes twice. Xiao Jinyan said again, "Didn't you already call me yesterday?" Shen Chuwei said, "It wasn't because His Highness did this or that I called you my concubine yesterday." Xiao Jinyan laughed angrily, "Are you reminding me to do it again?" Shen Chuwei shook his head quickly and said, "I don't mean this. Your Highness must not misunderstand me." "Yeah. Certainly. I don't believe it." Xiao Jinyan lowered his head and kissed her lips again. It was not as gentle as the kiss just now, but also a bit domineering. Shen Chuwei's eyes widened, and her personal experience let her know that Xiao Jinyan was serious. "Jinyan, my concubine has called me." "It's too late." Xiao Jinyan snorted, held her hand in his big hand, and intertwined his fingers with hers. Shen Chu was slightly relieved and couldn't help but said, "Your Highness, even if I am strong, I can't withstand you coming here every day." Xiao Jinyan paused and looked up at her. "Xiaju, just once." Shen Chuwei looked at the man in front of him. He was really handsome, but he also deserved a beating. Shen Chuwei grabbed his hand and asked, "Jinyan, you don't mean what you say?" Xiao Jinyan said, "Borrow it for tomorrow." Shen Chuwei. "Can I borrow this too? She really knows a lot." Finally, Shen Chu fell asleep due to slight fatigue, and his eyelids were as heavy as gold. When bathing, the body is surrounded by warm water, which relieves some fatigue. She squinted at the man next to her, wanting to curse him for being shameless. She said sincerely, "I am so sleepy." Xiao Jinyan looked at her eyes that couldn't be opened, feeling really sleepy. "It'll be ready soon." This was Xiao Jinyan's second time waiting for someone to take a bath. He also helped Shen Chuwei take a bath last night, but she didn't remember because she was already asleep at the time. After packing everything up, Xiao Jinyan carried Shen Chuwei to the bedside, put her into the quilt, and then followed her up. At this time, Shen Chuwei had fallen asleep, and slept very deeply. Xiao Jinyan hugged her and pinched her face, she slept so deeply. At this time, Xiao Jinyu was also facing a difficult situation. "When I came out of the shower, I saw Miss Han sitting on the bed waiting for me again, and I couldn't help but feel a little scared." "Miss Han, aren't you asleep yet?" Han Yan smiled and said, "Well, I'm waiting for King Yu." Xiao Jinyu came to the bedside, neither standing nor sitting, feeling a little embarrassed. "No need to wait for me, won't I go to bed now?" Han Yan smiled bravely, "Then why does King Yu stand still?" "I will go to bed now." Xiao Jinyu took off his shoes, climbed onto the bed in 2 steps, lifted the quilt and lay down in it. Han Yan also took off his shirt and went to bed. Xiao Jinyu looked at Miss Han's actions in confusion. "Miss Han, why are you doing this? A woman's reputation is very important. I was bought by King Yu, and I belong to King Yu. My reputation has already been like this since I was bought by King Yu." Miss Han slowly opened the quilt and lay down. Xiao Jinyu wants to cry but has no tears. Is this trying to torture him to death? "Miss Han, you'd better go back, in case this king..." Before Xiao Jinyu finished speaking, he was kissed by Miss Han. He gasped, thinking that Miss Han's bold behavior must have been led away by the madam before. Next day, Shen Chu opened his eyes slightly, but there was no Xiao Jinyan beside him. Looking at the sky outside the window, he knew that it was already getting late. She lay on the bed and didn't want to move. She wanted to borrow her sleep tonight and sleep with him together. Changzi was worried that Shen Chuwei was hungry, so she opened the door and walked in. She saw Shen Chuwei lying on the bed, his eyes squinted, half asleep and half awake. She walked over and said, "Little master, why don't you call me slave when you wake up?" "I'm borrowing my sleep tonight so we can sleep together," Shen Chu said weakly. Unfortunately, she couldn't sleep because she was hungry. Shen Chuwei's voice was no better than yesterday, it was still hoarse. Changzi looked confused. "Can I borrow this too?" Shen Chu said bitterly, "Xiao Jinyan borrowed it last night." Changzi was even more confused. What did His Highness borrow? Then she realized, "My lady, why are you calling His Highness by his name again? This is a crime of disrespect." Shen Chuwei blinked her beautiful eyes twice and said, "But I already called you." "I pretended not to hear it," Changzi coaxed. "My lady, don't sleep anymore. Let's get up and eat something delicious." Shen Chuwei immediately became energetic when she heard about something delicious. "What delicious food? Do you have pot stickers?" Changzi shook her head. "No pot stickers, but I made crystal buns." Shen Chuwei was not picky, "Crystal buns are fine too." "Then let's get up and wash up." Changzi lifted the quilt, helped Shen Chuwei up, and began to help her dress and wash up. Shen Chuwei came to the dining table with her legs swinging and sat down. Thinking of Xiao Jinyan's steps like the wind, she looked like nothing happened. She only felt her legs shaking more. The breakfast was very rich. Shen Chuwei had a delicious meal and recovered a lot of energy. Seeing some cakes bought last night, she felt a little happier. After eating a few pieces, her mood was as bright as the sunshine outside. She couldn't help but sigh, it was really a meal that relieved all worries. Shen Chuwei originally thought that Xiao Jinyan had borrowed the night before, so she could sleep well tonight, and she, a salted fish, would no longer have to be tossed around. It wasn't until the afternoon that Shen Chuwei realized that Xiao Jinyan was an out-and-out black-bellied big-tailed wolf. It was all good. "Good night, my dears." Acting cute and asking for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 213. After Changzi packed up her things, she saw Shen Chuwei standing still and stepped forward to ask in a low voice, "My lord, what are you doing?" Shen Chuwei stared at the carriage in front of him and replied, "I'm thinking about life." Changzi looked confused, thinking about life. How to think about life well? She suddenly realized, did His Highness bully the young master? Shen Chuwei paused when he heard the words, and then nodded sharply. It was not just bullying, it was clearly bullying severely. Xiao Jinyan had planned to leave Yongqian City this afternoon and sleep in the carriage at night, so he said he would borrow it tonight. Very good at forgetting. When Changzi saw it, she couldn't help but feel very distressed. "Your Highness, it's true, how can a man bully a woman? I'm so delicate, how can I bully her?" Shen Chu nodded slightly in agreement. "My body is still very sore now. There's something wrong with the way I walk." Xiao Jinyan came over and saw the master and servant whispering to each other. He said in a deep voice, "It's time to get on the carriage." Suddenly hearing Xiao Jinyan's voice, Shen Chu responded, "Oh," with a guilty conscience. Then he retreated behind Xiao Jinyan and followed him into the carriage. Changzi looked at Xiao Jinyan and made a face, "You know how to bully my little master, I won't add salt next time I come to Hehuan Hall for dinner. Qin Xiao came over and heard Chengzi's mumbling, and nudged Chengzi with his elbow. Little brother, what are you mumbling about? Qin Xiao is a martial arts practitioner, and Chengzi is a delicate little palace maid. How can she stand up to Qin Xiao's dominance? She immediately covered her arm in pain and raised her head to look at Qin Xiao with a guilty conscience. It's nothing, nothing. Qin Xiao said, I clearly heard you say no salt just now. Can you still eat the food without salt? Chengzi couldn't help but roll her eyes at Qin Xiao. She even heard it and asked. She raised her chin and refused to admit it. You must have misunderstood, and I didn't say anything. Qin Xiao pinched Chengzi's thin arms and legs, and said twice, How old are you and brother Shen? Why are you so delicate? How can you pinch someone's arm casually? You gangster! Chengzi's face turned red and she ran away angrily. Qin Xiao glanced at his hand and said, I just pinched it. How can a boy be so naughty? Is he a gangster? Why am I acting like a gangster? Wei Qi came over and patted Qin Xiao's shoulder hard. What are you, a grown man, talking about? You're just talking, let's go. After Wei Qi finished speaking, he strode away. Qin Xiao was left alone and messy in the wind. Why is my mother chirping? When he arrived at the carriage, Xiao Jinyan turned his head to look at Shen Shuwei, and at the same time stretched out his hand towards her. You go first. Shen Chu was stunned for a moment, and looked at the hand in front of him with flattery. The knuckles were long and clean. But after going to bed twice, the yellow waist in her mind always reminded her of some pictures she shouldn't have thought of. She held that hand and felt an extra hand on her waist, hugging her tightly and lifting her into the carriage. Shen Shuwei was really light. Xiao Jinyan lifted her up with almost no effort, not forgetting to remind her, be careful, lest you fall. Shen Chu slightly turned around and glanced at Xiao Jinyan. Looking at his handsome face, he always felt that there was something a bit arrogant in it. Xiao Jinyan said, What are you looking at? Go in first. Oh, Shen Chu looked away with a guilty conscience and ducked into the carriage. Xiao Jinyan got on the carriage neatly. The group returned to the capital in a grand manner. In the carriage, Shen Shuwei took out the cakes he bought yesterday one by one and placed them on the low table. Xiao Jinyan saw the tea and pastries. He opened the drawer and took out the tea set inside. He first boiled a pot of hot water and then made tea. Although Xiao Jinyan was always being waited on and he was never asked to make tea, he could still make tea. Shen Shuwei loved tea, but she was not good at making tea. Chengzi always made tea and put it in front of her. She looked at Xiao Jinyan's act of making tea, which was elegant, noble, kind, and pleasing to the eye. If it were her, she would probably be like the cow drink, Xiao Jinyan said, without any elegance or nobility at all. It was exactly 3 o'clock in Shenqi. Shen Shuwei had been hungry for a long time. She picked up a piece of tea cake and was about to bring it to her mouth. She saw Xiao Jinyan sitting opposite. Thinking that he was the prince, she still resisted eating and handed the tea cake to her. Passed. She asked in her still hoarse voice, Your Highness, do you want some tea cake? Xiao Jinyan made tea and looked at the tea cake in her hand. Try a little. He picked up the tea cake from Shen Shuwei's hand and put it to his mouth and took a bite. The texture was somewhat similar to the sweet-scented Osman Thus cake, but the taste was different. Shen Shuwei saw him eating, so he picked up a piece and put it to his mouth and took a bite. It was a little sweet, but the taste was okay. She ate 3 pieces in a row and was about to reach for the 4th piece when she was stopped by Xiao Jinyan. Eat less sweets and drink more tea. While talking, a cup of tea was handed to him. The prince spoke, and of course Shen Shuwei didn't dare to disobey him. She happened to be a little thirsty at this moment. She took the teacup from his hand, put it to her mouth and drank it in one sip, just in time to quench her thirst. Xiao Jinyan asked, Do you still like it? Shen Shuwei didn't understand tea, but from a drinking point of view, it tastes good. Xiao Jinyan nodded and lifted the teapot. Seeing this, Shen Shuwei hurriedly handed over the teacup. The boiling tea was poured into the teacup. It was such a small teacup, but the tea was not spilled at all, which is enough to show that he was very skilled. Shen Shuwei put it to his lips and drank it in one gulp. Xiao Jinyan saw it and corrected him, taste it slowly. I'm thirsty. Shen Shuwei put down the teacup, picked up a piece of jujube paste cake and took a bite. Xiao Jinyan reminded, you still need to be careful in front of outsiders. I won't show up in public, so outsiders can't see me, Shen Shuwei said, and stuffed half of the jujube paste cake in her hand into her mouth and ate it. Xiao Jinyan saw a headache. You will accompany me to various important occasions in the future, how can you not show up? Shen Shuwei puffed her cheeks and replied, in the future, it will be enough to let the crown princess go. I am a concubine and don't need to attend such important occasions. There will definitely be a crown princess in the future, and if nothing unexpected happens, it will be Chang consort. No matter what, it will not be his turn to attend important occasions. This is the second time Xiao Jinyan heard Shen Shuwei push him to another woman. Last time, he asked him to choose someone else, but this time, he directly asked him to bring another woman to attend important occasions. You want me to take someone else? I am a concubine, it's not appropriate, Shen Shuwei said. Xiao Jinyan nodded thoughtfully, well, I understand. Next time there is a banquet, I will take someone else. When Shen Shuwei heard about the banquet, she swallowed the jujube paste cake in her mouth. Your Highness, I am still competent to attend the banquet. No one is more suitable than me. You are a concubine, it's not appropriate. Xiao Jinyan picked up the teacup and drank it slowly, but snorted in her heart. When she heard about food, she was more active than anyone else. Good evening, my dears. As for what the hero said that night, whether the heroine heard it or not, it will be explained later. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 214. Sure enough, I can't communicate with Shen Shuwei using normal thinking. Otherwise, I will be so angry that she thought she was happy. Shen Shuwei said softly, the banquet is not an important occasion. Although I am a concubine, I can go. Your Highness has taken me to participate before. At the end, her voice became weaker because she lacked confidence. Xiao Jinyan raised her eyebrows, how do you know that the banquet is not an important occasion? Shen Shuwei was stunned for a moment. What she said was right. Sometimes banquets are also very important occasions. She thought about it and said, it's not an important occasion. Your Highness can take me there again. I'm not greedy. Xiao Jinyan paused when drinking tea. Maybe she didn't expect Shen Shuwei to say that. He said angrily, then why did you let me take someone else with me? I'm talking about important occasions. Shen Shuwei paused here and said helplessly, even if I want to go, the emperor and the queen will definitely not agree to let me go. Although there is no crown princess now, there will definitely be one in the future. She has no power and it will definitely not be her. She is a salted fish, and it is best to eat and drink for free. Xiao Jinyan stared at Shen Shuwei for a while, only to see her lowered her eyes, looking sad. Is this why you let me take someone else to important occasions? Shen Shuwei nodded, she was also very sad that she couldn't eat. But there was nothing she could do about it. After all, it was ancient times, feudal thinking, and there were many rules. Although I don't know much, I still know that the emperor's order cannot be violated. After hearing this, Xiao Jinyan was stunned for a long time, and suddenly felt relieved that she was considering him. The emperor's order is indeed inviolable, but he is also working hard. After working hard for so many years, he finally climbed to the position of the crown prince. He believed that it would not be long before he could decide his own life, which was not controlled by his father, the emperor, and the queen. This was the goal he had been working hard for since he came back as a hostage. When he looked at Shen Shuwei again, his eyes were a little gentler. That being said, it depends on human effort. Shen Shuwei suddenly curved her eyebrows. Then your highness will still take me to the banquet, right? Xiao Jinyan looked at Shen Shuwei, who was sad and upset the previous second, and curved her eyebrows the next second. This change was faster than turning a book. Well, if you work harder, I can take you with me. Shen Shuwei nodded obediently. I will eat more, and it won't be a wasted trip, your highness, rest assured. Xiao Jinyan. The sky gradually darkened, and the lights were turned on in the carriage, but the light was still a little dim. Because it was an official road, the carriage was spacious and not so bumpy. Shen Shuwei yawned, and the carriage was a little sleepy due to the bumps. Xiao Jinyan heard it, looked up, and saw Shen Shuwei leaning on the low table with her elbows and her chin in her hands, as if she would fall asleep in the next second. He said lightly, Xiaoju. Shen Shuwei raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, and asked in confusion, is your highness okay? Xiao Jinyan, come here. Oh, Shen Shuwei moved to Xiao Jinyan with doubt. Xiao Jinyan patted his thigh and said, I'm sleepy, so lie down and sleep for a while. Shen Shuwei asked, what about your highness? Xiao Jinyan, I'm not sleepy yet. Shen Shuwei lowered her eyes and looked at Xiao Jinyan's legs. He was wearing casual clothes today, not as gorgeous as in the palace. The moon-white robe made him look cold and noble. She lay down with the blanket and rested her head on Xiao Jinyan's legs. It was the first time she slept with a man's legs, and she was not used to it. The carriage was spacious and cushioned, very comfortable. Shen Shuwei opened her eyes and saw Xiao Jinyan's jawline, sharp and gentle. Facing those sparkling eyes, even in the dim carriage, it was still impossible to ignore them. She closed her eyes guiltily. Xiao Jinyan looked down, without saying anything, and lifted her hair behind her ears with his slender fingers. At first, Shen Shuwei felt something strange about that hand, and thought it would be difficult to fall asleep with her head on a man's thigh. The result was just the opposite. She fell asleep soon after closing her eyes. Although the carriage was a bit bumpy, it did not hinder her sleep at all. When she woke up, it was already light, the candle in the carriage had burned out, and the faint morning light came in through the curtains. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan, who was sleeping soundly on the soft pillow. She gently rubbed her waist. After all, the carriage was not as comfortable as the bed. After driving for such a long time, the carriage stopped in front of a restaurant. Because the prisoners were escorted, there were many people watching. Xiao Jinyan asked the guards to surround the prisoners to prevent people from taking advantage of them. Shen Shuwei had eaten some pastries last night, and when she saw the porridge and snacks, her appetite immediately increased. Xiao Jinyan reminded, eat slowly, be careful not to choke. I know, Shen Shuwei said in a low voice, because there were guests all around. Xiao Jinyan came over and asked in a low voice, sister-in-law, did you sleep well last night? When she mentioned last night, Shen Shuwei subconsciously glanced at Xiao Jinyan. She slept on Xiao Jinyan's thighs last night, which was much more comfortable than sleeping sitting. She smiled and said, it's pretty good, how about you? Xiao Jinyan rubbed her neck, feeling very aggrieved, not at all, my neck is so sore. Han Yan's eyes were fixed on Xiao Jinyan. Seeing that he and Shen Shuwei were so close, his brows slightly frowned. Prince Yu, I'll rub it for you later. Xiao Jinyan quickly refused, no, just rest for a while. Who knows how you rub it, what if you are deliberately teasing me? Han Yan smiled lightly and did not answer. Xiao Jinyan glanced at Han Yan, a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes, and he always felt that his brother was afraid of this Miss Han. After breakfast, Xiao Jinyan called his brother aside to ask. What's going on between you and Miss Han? It's okay, Brother, we are fine. Xiao Jinyu found something wrong and changed his words, no, Miss Han is fine, she took good care of me along the way. Xiao Jinyan frowned, always feeling that his brother was lying and trying to cover up the truth. Why don't you tell the truth in front of me? Brother, I'm telling the truth. Miss Han is a good person. Don't look at her tall stature. In fact, she is very gentle, Xiao Jinyu said at the end, and deliberately emphasized his tone, fearing that his brother would not believe it. Xiao Jinyan stared at Xiao Jinyu with his sharp eyes for a long time, and finally sighed, you are almost 17, you should know what is important and what is not, understand? Xiao Jinyu nodded vigorously, brother, I know, don't worry. Here, Shen Shuwei found that Chengzi was a little strange. As soon as Qin Xiao came over, Chengzi pulled her aside to hide. She couldn't help asking, Chengzi, why are you so afraid of brother Qin? Chengzi didn't have the nerve to say that Qin Xiao pinched her arm, so she could only lie, my lady, it's okay, I just smell the sweat on his body is very unpleasant. Coincidentally, Qin Xiao heard it, how can my sweat smell so bad? There are more updates. Begging for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets by acting cute. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Iyun Si. Chapter 215. Qin Xiao raised his arm as he spoke, lowered his head and smelled it. There was no unpleasant smell, as Chun 11 said. Chengzi was startled when she heard Qin Xiao's voice. She was avoiding him, but he could still come up to her. She turned around and saw Qin Xiao lowering his head and smelling her own scent. His naive look made Chengzi amused again. I groaned in my heart, how stupid. Chengzi raised her chin and said, you smell bad. Shen Chu looked at Chun 11 slightly and then at Qin Xiao. Chun 11 would not target others properly, and even if Qin Xiao's sweat smelled really bad, he would not say it in public. Brother Qin, what's wrong with you? Qin Xiao sighed helplessly, hey, I didn't do anything to him. He said I was playing a gangster. Brother Shen, we have been together for a while. Do you think I look like a gangster? Shen Shuwei had gotten along with Qin Xiao several times, and she still understood Qin Xiao's personality somewhat. Besides, Qin Xiao was Xiao Jinyan's personal bodyguard. If his character was not good, Xiao Jinyan would not reuse him. She nudged Chengzi with her elbow and asked in a low voice, Chengzi, what's wrong? Chengzi knew that she couldn't hide it even if she wanted to, so she leaned into Shen Shuwei's ear and whispered, little master, he squeezed the slave's arm, what else can he do if he's not being a hooligan? Chengzi said, feeling extremely aggrieved. She has grown so big and yet no man has ever pinched her arm. Shen Shuwei couldn't help laughing when she heard this. Chengzi said coquettishly, my dear master, you are still smiling. Shen Chu suppressed a smile and said, you have forgotten that you are wearing men's clothes now. To Qin Xiao, you are a boy. I pinch your arm and you are not being a hooligan. The words woke up the dreamer, and Chengzi finally realized, yes, I'm dressed as a boy now, I forgot about it. When I think of my coquettish behavior last night, I feel so embarrassed just thinking about it. It's not surprising that Chengzi forgot that she was wearing men's clothes, because she had no experience wearing men's clothes for the first time and didn't care. Shen Shuwei comforted him, okay, brother Qin is not a stingy person. Just let me know. Oh, Chengzi looked back at Qin Xiao, still extremely embarrassed. Qin Xiao knew from the first look at Shen Shuwei's expression that he trusted him. As expected, the people His Highness liked were all reliable. He looked at Chengzi again, look, even brother Shen believes that I'm not a gangster, so you should believe it too. Chengzi glanced at Qin Xiao, a little embarrassed, well, brother Qin, I wrongly blamed you last night, don't mind. Qin Xiao saw two red clouds on Chengzi's cheeks and was stunned for a moment, it's good that the misunderstanding has been resolved. So are you. How come boys are more shy than girls? Changzi was embarrassed to say that she was a girl, so she said perfunctorily, I have been raised among women since I was a child, so of course there will be some differences. So that's it. Qin Xiao patted Chun 11 on the shoulder and said, then keep an eye on us from now on. I guarantee that within 2 years, you will become very manly. Changzi was so embarrassed that she hurriedly avoided Qin Xiao's clutches and came to Shen Shuwei's side. Qin Xiao didn't say anything when he saw Changzi being so shy. Just when Shen Shuwei and Changzi turned to leave, Qin Xiao asked again, I didn't take a shower last night. Do you smell really bad? Changzi looked back at Qin Xiao and couldn't help laughing, you're so stupid. After Changzi finished speaking, she pulled Shen Shuwei away. Qin Xiao stayed there and was stunned for a long time. What does laughter mean? Does it smell bad? After saying that, he lowered his head and smelled it again. It didn't stink. After traveling for most of the day, Shen Chu touched his stomach slightly and felt a little hungry. He had already eaten a lot of pastries in the morning, and now he particularly wanted spicy food. She glanced sideways at Xiao Jinyan. She had been reading the book for an hour and was still reading. If you work so hard, if you don't want to be the prince, who will be the prince? Xiao Jinyan's eyes paused, and the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Shen Chu asked in a low voice, Your Highness, I have been reading for so long. Can we eat something and take a rest? Xiao Jinyan put down the book in his hand, looked up at Shen Shuwei, a smile flashed in his eyes, okay. Your Highness, let's eat instant noodles, Shen Shuwei said, putting down the snowball, and then took out 2 buckets of instant noodles from his pocket, one with spicy flavor and one with mushroom stew in chicken soup. When she left the palace, Shen Shuwei took out some instant noodles and put them in his pocket, just to avoid suspicion. Xiao Jinyan looked at the 2 buckets of noodles in her hands. She had never seen such things since she was a child. Where did you come from? Why have I never seen this before? Shen Shuwei had already found an excuse, Your Highness, although I don't know how to play music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, I can do other things. I am best at eating. These are the simplest ones. I know a lot about them. Xiao Jinyan heard this and thought, resurrection of corpses even exists, so what else doesn't exist? I didn't realize that Xiaju is so ingenious. Shen Shuwei was non-committal. The hot water is ready. I just made a pot of tea and it is heating up. Shen Chu unpacked the instant noodles with ease and familiarity. After a while, he unpacked the 2 buckets of instant noodles and put the seasonings in them. Finally, pour hot water, close the lid and wait to eat. I haven't eaten instant noodles in a few days, and I'm already craving for it just from the smell. Xiao Jinyan also smelled delicious. He, who had never cared about food, suddenly looked forward to Shen Shuwei's favorite instant noodles. What does it taste like? Shen Shuwei calculated the time in her mind. She first opened the instant noodles with mushroom stewed chicken soup flavor, stirred them with a fork and spoon, and then pushed them in front of Xiao Jinyan, smiling and saying, Your Highness, you can have instant noodles now. Then she handed the fork and spoon over. Xiao Jinyan took the fork and spoon from her hand, looked at the steaming hot noodles, felt a little magical, and tasted very fragrant. He picked up a few and passed them to his lips to cool them down, and then put them into his mouth. The taste was very different from what he imagined, but it was delicious. Shen Shuwei also started eating at this time. The spicy flavor was her favorite. She sipped twice, wiped her nose with a satisfied handkerchief, and then continued to eat. Xiao Jinyan also noticed something was wrong. Etiquette and manners are particularly important in the royal family. He took out his handkerchief and wiped his nose quietly. Seeing that the instant noodles in Shen Shuwei's bucket were different from his own, he asked curiously, Why are your instant noodles different from mine? Shen Shuwei wiped her nose and said, Because your highness doesn't eat spicy food, I like it. Xiao Jinyan was stunned for a moment. He had never told Shen Shuwei that he didn't eat spicy food, but she knew it carefully and always remembered that he didn't eat spicy food, which was very precious. She remembered it not because she wanted to please him, but simply knew that she didn't like spicy food. Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes and looked at the steaming instant noodles, and suddenly thought of something very important. Xiaoju, if the food and grass are in short supply and cannot be transported in time, using instant noodles as a temporary substitute can solve the urgent problem. Good night, my dears. Being cute and acting cute to ask for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. Starting tomorrow, I will add more chapters for my dears. 4 chapters and 8,000 words. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 216. Shen Shuwei looked up at Xiao Jinyan after hearing that, and saw a strange look in his phoenix eyes. There were so many soldiers in the barracks, and each of them had a bag or a bucket, which would cost at least 100,000. When she thought of 100,000 instant noodles, she subconsciously held her pocket tightly. Xiao Jinyan actually coveted her instant noodles. Your Highness, isn't it true that food and grass must be sent before the troops move? Xiao Jinyan nodded. That being said, food and grass are in short supply and cannot be delivered in time unless there is an accident. Shen Shuwei secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the instant noodles were saved. If there is no chance to travel back to modern times in the future, she will still have instant noodles to eat in decades. The next day, Shen Shuwei held her chin with one hand and stroked a snowball with the other hand, while looking at the scene in front of her. During the time on the road, Xiao Jinyan read books all the time. Your Highness, reading in a carriage is bad for your eyes. Xiao Jinyan said lightly, wrong reason. Yes, how could people in ancient times think that reading would cause myopia? I'm afraid they didn't even know the word myopia. Shen Shuwei couldn't help but say another sentence, Your Highness, people's eyes are very fragile. If you don't take care of them, they will have problems until they go on strike and stop working. Then you have to do this if you want to read. Shen Shuwei said that she used her hand as a book and put it against her eyes to express the meaning of her words. Xiao Jinyan saw her reading and smiled, then I will take a rest. Xiao Jinyan put down the book in his hand, thought of the king tea that Shen Shuwei gave him last time, took out some and soaked it in hot water. The king tea was soaked in boiling water, and the fragrance immediately floated out. Shen Shuwei knew that it was the king tea she gave her as soon as she smelled the tea, and she brought it with her when she went on a long journey. She curled the corners of her lips slightly. After several days of traveling, they slept in the open air. Shen Shuwei lay on the low table weakly, staring at Sichuan with lifeless eyes. Xiao Jinyan saw it and thought she was sleepy, so he said, if you want to sleep here, come to me. Shen Shuwei stared at Xiao Jinyan and hesitated for a while, then obediently moved to his side and rested her head on his thigh. She had been like this for the past few nights. Sichuan blinked his blue eyes twice, walked gracefully and nestled beside Shen Shuwei, curled up and planned to take a nap. When Shen Shuwei saw Sichuan, she thought of roasted pigeon, and when she thought of roasted pigeon, she began to miss the taste of barbecue. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, shouting silently in her heart, Xiao Jinyan, I want to eat meat. Xiao Jinyan listened, lowered his eyes and looked at Shen Shuwei, and saw that she was staring at him without blinking, and her young face was full of the 4 words I want to eat meat. Shen Shuwei found that Xiao Jinyan suddenly looked at her, and she didn't feel guilty, anyway, he couldn't hear her inner thoughts. Xiao Jinyan retracted his gaze and smiled in a place where Shen Shuwei couldn't see. That afternoon, Xiao Jinyan ordered to set up camp and rest. Shen Shuwei came down with Xiao Jinyan, and as soon as they came down, they took Chengzi to the bathroom. She had solved her physiological needs in the wild countless times, and she was used to it. After washing her hands, she came back and saw Xiao Jinyan walking away with a bow and arrow. She asked the guard beside her in confusion, "Where is your highness going?" The guard replied, "I don't know." "Okay." Shen Shuwei retracted her gaze and walked towards the carriage. Chengzi knew Shen Shuwei too well, and knew that she was greedy when she saw her like this. "My lady, let's cook tonight, fried rice with eggs." Shen Shuwei nodded happily, "Okay, fried rice with eggs is not bad either. I'll go wash the rice first, and then make a fire." Chengzi said and came to the carriage behind, took out an iron pot, and the carriage was always prepared with rice. Chengzi scooped the rice skillfully and went to the lake to wash the rice. Qin Xiao was just filling a water bag with water when he saw Chengzi coming over with a pot. "Little brother, what are you doing?" Chengzi's cheeks turned red when she saw Qin Xiao. "I'm washing rice and cooking." Qin Xiao was a little curious, "There's no vegetable, how can I eat rice after washing it?" Chengzi knew Qin Xiao had never eaten egg fried rice, and her tone was quite proud. "Egg fried rice, it's delicious." Qin Xiao said, "Egg fried rice? It's the first time I've heard of it." Chengzi squatted down and started washing rice, but the pot was a little big, and it was a little inconvenient for her thin arms and legs. Qin Xiao saw it, strode over, put the water bag on the stone beside him. "I'll help you." Qin Xiao was a martial artist, and he took the pot with almost no effort, and started washing rice with his waist bent. When Chengzi reacted, she saw this scene. Men are stronger than women. It's so easy to wash rice with such a big iron pot. After a while, Qin Xiao washed the rice. Chengzi was about to reach out to take it, but Qin Xiao dodged her. "Let me do it, don't fall with your thin arms and legs." As he said that, he freed one hand to pick up a few water bags on the stone and strode towards the carriage. Chengzi blushed and trotted behind Qin Xiao. The rice was washed, and the next step was to make a fire. Chengzi had always stayed in the deep palace, and it was convenient to make a fire in the small kitchen, but it would be a bit troublesome to make a fire in the wild. She picked up some branches, but she couldn't light them. Shen Shuwei saw it and was about to come over to help, but saw Qin Xiao striding over. "I'll help you." Chengzi raised her head and saw Qin Xiao's tall body coming over and staying beside her, forming a sharp contrast with her petite body. Qin Xiao had rich experience in surviving in the wild, and he made a fire in a short time. Chengzi looked at Qin Xiao with admiration. "You are so good, I just tried for a long time but couldn't light it." Qin Xiao patted the dust on his hands and said, "You are using the wrong method, of course it won't work." Chengzi saw that Qin Xiao's hands were all black and grey, so he took out a handkerchief from his body and handed it to Qin Xiao. "Your hands are dirty, wipe them." Qin Xiao looked at the handkerchief in front of him, hesitated for a moment and took it. It was a handkerchief embroidered with orchids. He smelled it closely and it was fragrant. "Why are you a boy still carrying a handkerchief? It smells like powder, too feminine." Chengzi blushed, said nothing, lowered her head and continued to put firewood under the pot, because she couldn't say that she was a girl to avoid trouble. Qin Xiao saw that Chengzi ignored him, thinking that he had said something wrong to make Chengzi angry. He explained, "I just said it casually, I didn't mean anything else." Chengzi still lowered her head and ignored him. Qin Xiao had no choice but to look down at the handkerchief, which had been stained by his own hands. He stood up and went to the lake to wash the handkerchief, intending to return it after drying it. Shen Shuwei looked at the scene and always felt a little strange. She felt that she always blushed because she was not satisfied with her face, and Chengzi was even worse than that. She retracted her gaze and planned to try her luck to see if she could meet a wild rabbit or something. Before she took a few steps, she saw a slender figure walking towards her not far away. The man was holding a wild rabbit and a pheasant in his hands. She paused. As the sun set, the man had an outstanding figure and an extraordinary demeanor. Who else could it be besides Xiao Jinyan? My dears, good afternoon. I am acting cute and asking for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 217. Shen Chu was stunned for a while, then trotted over. Xiao Jinyan slowed down and calmly watched the petite figure running towards him, with a happy and excited smile on his face. The scene made him feel a little dazed for a moment, as if he had experienced a similar scene before. Shen Chuwei ran up to Xiao Jinyan and stopped, glanced at the pheasant and hare in his hand, and her eyebrows curved with joy. Your Highness, you are so fast. There are hare and pheasant to eat tonight. Xiao Jinyan ordered, Wei Qi, deal with them. Its master Wei Qi took the pheasant and hare and walked to the lake. Before leaving, he glanced at Shen Chu's slightly happy smile. He really looked like Shen Liangdi. Xiao Jinyan went to the lake to wash his hands. Shen Chuwei followed behind him with brisk steps. He was so happy when he thought about roasting rabbit and roasting pheasant tonight. The lake is not far from here, just a few steps away. There was a huge stone by the lake. Xiao Jinyan squatted on the stone and washed his hands with the lake water. Shen Chuwei squatted next to him and took out a handkerchief from her sleeve pocket. When she first put it on, she always forgot to put it on, and Chengzi took the trouble to tell her n times. Now she is also used to carrying a handkerchief with her. When something happens, she can cover her face and laugh without being noticed. After Xiao Jinyan finished washing her hands, she handed over the handkerchief. Your Highness, wipe your hands. Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes and glanced at the pink handkerchief in front of him, and said warmly, You take my place. Shen Chuwei agreed without thinking, Okay. She lowered her eyes and looked at the two hands in front of her. Under the setting sun, the hands stained with water droplets were extremely white, with long and distinct knuckles. She held a handkerchief in one hand and grabbed Xiao Jinyan's hand in the other, wiping it carefully and carefully. She also took the opportunity to wipe the oil. Xiao Jinyan's hands are not only beautiful to look at, but also easy to touch. Shen Chuwei's little movements were caught in Xiao Jinyan's eyes. I remember that painting, and I also have the hand that painted it. Shen Chu paused in his wiping movements and couldn't help but sigh. The prince's memory is really not impeccable, he can still remember this. In fact, she not only has facial control, but also has some hand control. She said without raising her head, Your Highness, you don't know. Hands are a person's second face. If the face is painted, of course the hands must also be painted. Xiao Jinyan raised his eyes and looked at her. Why have I never heard such remarks before? Because it was my concubine who made the remarks. If I don't tell His Highness, of course His Highness has never heard of it, so there is no need to be surprised. Shen Chuwei smiled as he spoke, somewhat admiring his ability to adapt to nonsense. Xiao Jinyan was non-committal. Shen Chuwei took back his hand and said, Your Highness, it's done. Xiao Jinyan was not in a hurry to leave, but sat down on the stone. Shen Chuwei saw this and sat side by side on the stone with Xiao Jinyan. The afterglow of the setting sun shines on the lake, making the waves sparkle. Xiaju. Shen Chuwei heard Xiao Jinyan calling her, raised her head and looked over, and saw him looking at her with lowered eyes. Your Highness. Of course, the facial expression must be an illusion. Xiao Jinyan looked at her and moved his eyes down, landing on her pink lips. He endured it for a few days, but this time he finally couldn't hold it back. He must have been unable to help himself. Shen Chu blinked his beautiful big eyes twice and looked at the handsome face that was getting closer. Forgive her that she was thinking about whether the kiss would have any impact on the chocolate she had stolen just now. Xiao Jinyan has a misophobia. Master, it's not good. Qin Xiao ran all the way over and saw this scene, and the rest of his words were stuck in his throat. He opened his mouth and looked at it in surprise. He must have seen it wrong. How could it be possible for the master, right? As soon as Xiao Jinyan touched her soft lips, he was interrupted by a sudden master sound, and his face became terrifyingly gloomy. Shen Shuwei looked embarrassed. Xiao Jinyan raised his head and looked at Qin Xiao on the shore, his eyes as cold as ice knives. What's the matter? Qin Xiao felt a chill running down his spine, and said bravely, Master, the magistrate of Luo County suddenly fainted, and I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Although Luo magistrate is a prisoner now, he has not been dismissed from his post and is still the magistrate. The magistrate of Luo County was an important figure in the corruption and perversion of the law this time. Something happened before he was brought back to Dali Temple for proper interrogation, so the follow-up clues were lost. What? Xiao Jinyan immediately stood up from the stone. Shen Shuwei also stood up and saw the ashes on the back of Xiao Jinyan's butt. She reached out and flicked the ashes. Qin Xiao. He actually touched his master's butt. How brave he was. Xiao Jinyan froze, and when he turned his head and looked over, he saw that Shen Shuwei had finished playing and was patting his butt. The movement was very casual, the same as before. Only then did he realize that Shen Shuwei was helping him flick the dust just now. By the time Xiao Jinyan rushed to the prison car, Luo's Hixian had been put down from the prison car by the guards and lay flat on the ground. I didn't bring the imperial doctor with me this time, so after the guards put Luo's Hixian down, they didn't know what to do. Xiao Jinyan took 2 steps forward, squatted down in front of Luo's Hixian, looked at Luo's Hixian's face carefully, and asked coldly, when did you notice that he was fainting? Master, after traveling for such a long time, when I wanted to give Luo's Hixian some water, I found him fainting. Xiao Jinyan asked again, what did he eat before? The subordinate replied, I ate a white steamed bun for lunch and drank some water. Shen Shuwei squatted down along with her. She took out disposable gloves from her sleeve pocket, opened Luo's Hixian's eyelids, and found nothing but eye droppings. Then she pinched Luo's Hixian's jaw hard, forcing him to open his mouth, and a stench hit him. Come on, I almost sent Shen Shuwei away. At this time, Shen Shuwei regretted not wearing a mask. Luo's Hixian was almost 50 years old, and he didn't clean himself properly. In addition, he had been sitting in a prison car for the past 2 days and had not washed for days. The smell was imaginable. At the same time, Xiao Jinyan was almost sent away because he was close to her. How could he, who was obsessed with misophobia, bear the sudden stench? Xiao Jinyan looked at Shen Shuwei's actions with a calm look, because he knew that Shen Shuwei had some medical skills and might be saved. It was just a little difficult for her, a woman, to do these things. Shen Shuwei didn't find the problem, and she hurriedly let go of Luo's Hixian's jaw to block the invasion of the stench. She picked up Luo's Hixian's wrist, took out a silk scarf and put it on his wrist, and then diagnosed Luo's Hixian's pulse. Xiao Jinyan saw all the details of Shen Shuwei wearing gloves and using a silk scarf. Who said she didn't know the rules and etiquette? Not only did it solve the problem, but it also avoided suspicion. What Xiao Jinyan didn't know was that Shen Shuwei actually hated to touch Magistrate Luo because she didn't like him. On the day she moved into the magistrate's mansion, she ran into Magistrate Luo. His wretched eyes were on her, looking at her unscrupulously, wishing to eat her up. Fortunately, the law is long and there is no loophole. Xiao Jinyan saw Shen Shuwei withdraw her hand, and couldn't help but worry, Xiaoju, is there any hope for Magistrate Luo? Good evening. There are more updates. Please vote. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 218. Xiao Jinyan said in a voice that only 2 people could hear. Shen Shuwei said in a relaxed tone, "Don't worry, Your Highness, Magistrate Luo will not die." If it weren't for the fact that Luoji County was of great use to Xiao Jinyan, she wouldn't even bother to save him. Xiao Jinyan secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Shen Shuwei said he couldn't die, so he couldn't die. That's good. If you die, it will be very troublesome to return to Beijing. Without saying a word, Shen Shuwei took out the needle bag and spread it on his leg. He took out a silver needle and applied it with familiarity. Then she took out some medicinal herbs from the bag, which originally needed to be ground into crumbs and then made into pills. She directly dipped some water into it, rolled it into a ball, and opened Luo's Hixian's mouth. This time Shen Shuwei learned smarter, held his breath, stuffed the whole medicine ball inside, and fed him some water. The whole set of movements is smooth, without any delay. Xiao Jinyan also held his breath when he saw Shen Chu slightly opening Luo's Hixian's mouth. Anyone who smelled that smell would be unbearable. After a while, Luo's Hixian woke up. He opened his eyes and saw so many people gathered around him. He had been stunned for a long time. Seeing Luo's Hixian wake up, Xiao Jinyan said coldly, "Luo's Hixian, don't play any tricks, otherwise don't blame me for being rude." When Luo's Hixian heard this, his eyes widened in fright, and he uttered a sentence after a long time, "Are you His Highness the Crown Prince?" The trembling voice represented how scared he was at this time. Xiao Jinyan just looked at Luo's Hixian coldly and already showed his identity. Luo's Hixian was so frightened that he glanced at Shen Shuwei and saw that she was holding a silver needle in her hand, and her body trembled. Xiao Jinyan ordered, "Tie him up and gag him." I obey. The guard pulled out the rope and tied up Luo's Hixian Wuhuida. Then he found a rag and stuffed it into Luo's Hixian's mouth to prevent him from biting his tongue and committing suicide. Xiao Jinyan has already left here with Shen Shuwei. At this time, Wei Qi had already prepared the wild rabbit and pheasant, and Chengzi was applying sauce on them, preparing to marinate them for a while before grilling them. When Shen Shuwei came, the fire had already been set up and she suddenly remembered the fruit wine she secretly asked Chengzi to bring out. It was given to her by Tao Chenjui, thinking of drinking it on the way. Shen Chu turned around slightly and walked in the direction of the carriage. Xiao Jinyan grabbed her hand and asked in a low voice, "Where are you going?" Shen Chu whispered, "I'm going to get something. I'll be back soon." Xiao Jinyan, "I will accompany you." Shen Shuwei nodded happily, "Okay." The two walked side by side to the carriage. Qin Xiao secretly raised his head and looked at the two people side by side. Thinking of the scene he just saw, he tried his best to brainwash himself, "I must have seen it wrong. How could it be possible for the master? It cannot be the case." Wei Qi bumped Qin Xiao's arm with his elbow, "What's wrong with you? You're so confused." Qin Xiao looked back at Wei Qi and sighed, "Oh, you don't understand." "Yes, you know what you are saying." Wei Qi snorted and looked back to add firewood to the fire. Qin Xiao was almost depressed to death. "I am a tall and dignified man, why do I have to be such a bitch?" Chengzi was roasting rabbit and pheasant seriously. Seeing Qin Xiao's depressed look, Xian couldn't help but laugh. Arriving in front of the carriage, Shen Shuwei leaned half of his body into the carriage. Xiao Jinyan saw this and pulled the person out. As soon as Shen Shuwei reached the bag of fruit wine, he was pulled out by Xiao Jinyan, and he watched the fruit wine go away from him. She turned back to look at Xiao Jinyan doubtfully and heard him say, "Tell me what you want to bring, and I will go and get it." Shen Shuwei didn't refuse, "It's fruit wine, in a grey cloth bag." After hearing this, Xiao Jinyan got on the carriage neatly. He saw a grey cloth bag in the corner, picked it up, and then jumped out of the carriage neatly. He lifted the grey cloth bag and showed it to Shen Shuwei, "Is this it?" Shen Shuwei stretched out his arms to hold the cloth bag in his arms, and said with a smile, "This is it. Let's drink this tonight to cheer up." Xiao Jinyan asked, is this wine? Shen Shuwei nodded vigorously, yeah, it's fruit wine. It tastes very good. Tao Chenjui gave it to me. Tao Chenjui? Xiao Jinyan didn't have much impression of Tao Chenjui because they met too few times, and he didn't know if she had any purpose in trying so hard to please Shen Shuwei. Chengzi asked Qin Xiao and Wei Qi to watch the fire, while she went to scramble eggs and fried rice, bringing eggs specially. Shen Shuwei gave her a lot of ham. After the egg fried rice was fried, the wild rabbit and pheasant were also roasted. The aroma was so fragrant that everyone present could smell it and couldn't help drooling. Among them was Lugos Hixian, who was in the prison car. He had eaten white steamed buns for several days and had never even smelled the meat. Now that he smelled the aroma of rice and barbecue, he was already so greedy that he could not stop salivating. It just can't flow out. I could only stare at it with my eyes closed, but couldn't eat. Everyone sat in 3 circles and started eating. This was the first time for everyone to eat egg fried rice. It was so delicious. It was also the first time that everyone knew that rice can be so delicious without vegetables. Shen Shuwei arranged the wine glass, took off the bottle cap, and poured the fruit wine into the wine glass. The pure wine aroma was not spicy, but very sweet. Shen Shuwei poured the first cup to Xiao Jinyan. Your Highness, try it, it tastes very good. Yes, Xiao Jinyan took the wine glass and brought it to his lips to taste it. It was indeed as he said, the taste was sweet and not spicy. Shen Shuwei also poured herself a glass. She hadn't drank in a few days, and now she was a little greedy when she asked about the smell of the wine. She raised her head and drank it all in one gulp. Xiao Jinyan saw it, but did not stop him. Fruit wine should not make people drunk easily. At this time, the wild rabbit was roasted on both sides, golden brown, crispy and fragrant. Xiao Jinyan tore off a wild rabbit leg from the rabbit and handed it to Shen Shuwei. Be careful of the heat. Shen Shuwei happily took it, handed it to her lips to cool it down, and couldn't wait to take a bite. It was really delicious. Since returning from the autumn hunting last year, Shen Shuwei has not eaten roasted rabbit meat. This time, it can be regarded as satisfying her craving. Chengzi was eating egg fried rice, and suddenly there was a piece of rabbit meat in front of her. She looked up and found that it was Qin Xiao, who tore a piece of rabbit meat for her. She was stunned for a moment, thinking that she was a boy now, and should be more generous and not too shy. Thank you. After she thanked him politely, she took the rabbit meat from him and began to eat it. It was her first time to eat roasted rabbit meat, not to mention how delicious it was. Qin Xiao looked down at Chengzi's appearance while eating. He was too gentle. If he wanted to become manly, he had a long way to go. Shen Shuwei ate and drank enough, wiped her mouth contentedly, and then followed Xiao Jinyan into the tent. The two of them washed up briefly. It was still early. Xiao Jinyan looked down at Shen Shuwei's red cheeks and blurred eyes. She was drinking fruit wine. Why did she look drunk? Xiaoju, come here. Shen Shuwei walked over with a shaky step, but stepped on her own foot and fell directly into Xiao Jinyan's arms. Gongzi Yunsi, my dears, this is a sweet and cute article with a relaxed and sand sculpture style. It is not as rigorous as traditional ancient Chinese, and everything serves the plot. There is one more chapter, probably after midnight. Act like a spoiled child and ask for votes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 219. Ah, he exclaimed instinctively. Who would have thought that walking only 2 or 3 steps could be so unstable? Shen Shuwei never expected that someone so big could fall because of stepping on his own foot. Shen Shuwei was in a good mood today, so she drank a few more drinks and had long forgotten that she would get drunk after drinking too much. Xiao Jinyan quickly stretched out his arms to hold the person who fell in front of him firmly into his arms. Shen Shuwei instinctively held onto Xiao Jinyan's arm tightly, and she was secretly relieved that she didn't fall to the ground. She raised her delicate little face and said with a hint of drunkenness, "His Highness is so awesome, he caught me in one fell swoop." After Xiao Jinyan stabilized her, he lowered his eyes and saw that she looked drunk, and even her tone of voice was a little different from usual. He pinched her red face with his slender fingers, and said with a doting voice, "It's just fruit wine, why are you drunk?" Shen Chu chuckled slightly, "I'm not drunk, I can still drink." Generally, when a drunk person yells that he is not drunk, it means he is very drunk. "Yes, Xiaju is not drunk." Xiao Jinyan hugged her and sat down on the chair. Shen Chu held Xiao Jinyan's face slightly, frowned and said, "There are two highnesses now, which one is the real one?" If it had been anyone else, looking drunk and talking nonsense, Xiao Jinyan would have thrown him out long ago. Only Shen Shuwei was very patient. Xiao Jinyan explained patiently, "That's because you are dazzled. There is only one in this palace." Shen Shuwei stared at Xiao Jinyan with wide eyes for a while, trying to figure out how many Xiao Jinyan were lying on the ground. She suddenly came over and said, "Xiaju wants to kiss you." Xiao Jinyan watched Shen Chu slightly press the tip of his nose against his own, and his childish voice made him stunned for a long time. He gave Shen Chu a slight kiss on the lips and smiled fondly, "I feel a lot more courageous now that I'm drunk." Shen Shuwei kissed him back because it was only fair. She hugged Xiao Jinyan's neck tightly with her arms, and asked in a drunken tone against his ear, "Jinyan, is what you said that day true?" That night, Shen Chu faintly heard someone talking, but because he was too deep, he didn't know whether it was real or just a figment of his imagination. "Now that I was very drunk, I asked the doubts that I had suppressed for a long time, just because I wanted a real result. If he were awake, he probably wouldn't be able to ask." Xiao Jinyan listened and was stunned for a while before he realized what Shen Shuwei was asking. "Of course it's true. When did I lie to you?" Shen Chu chuckled slightly, his voice purely like a child's. Xiao Jinyan turned his head to look at her and saw that her eyebrows were curved, her big hands were holding her forehead, and she moved her over so that she was facing him. "So happy." Shen Shuwei stared at Xiao Jinyan without blinking, then leaned forward and kissed his lips. "Kiss him the way he kisses you." Xiao Jinyan felt her initiative. This was the second time she kissed him, and it felt completely different from the last time. "Last time I was as jerky as a newbie. This time it's a novice trying to become a veteran, clumsily and throbbingly." Hiss, Xiao Jinyan felt that the skin on his lips was broken, and he tasted a hint of sweetness. "Xiaoju, that's not the case." Xiao Jinyan looked at the drunken Shen Shuwei and shook his head helplessly. He turned his passivity into initiative and taught her himself. He has been on the road for days, but he has always been patient and restrained. He would only kiss her forehead and corners of her lips when she fell asleep. There will be no hindrance to this, and when my emotions reach this point, I don't want to endure it anymore. Next day, when Shen Shuwei woke up, she had a headache. She opened her eyes and stared at the carport above her head in a daze for a while. "Are you awake?" a familiar voice suddenly came from above her head. She slowly turned her head and was stunned again when she saw Xiao Jinyan's unparalleled handsome face. It was only at this time that she realized that she was on a carriage, and with the sound of the wheels in her ears, she guessed that she was on the road. "Last night we obviously just drank and ate barbecue and slept in a tent." "Your Highness, are we on our way so early?" Shen Shuwei subconsciously thought that he was sleeping too deeply because he got up early on the way and Xiao Jinyan carried him into the carriage because of his deep sleep. When Xiao Jinyan saw her like this, he guessed that she was asleep. "It's already late." "Not yet." As soon as Shen Shuwei heard this, it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He thought that he had not eaten breakfast or lunch, and his already hungry stomach became even more hungry. She sat up suddenly, but halfway up, she found that she was very sore, and her brows wrinkled. How is this going? Did he take a carriage and drive all night last night? Shen Chu frowned slightly and thought for a while. He didn't sleep like this in the carriage a few nights ago. Xiao Jinyan looked at her actions and quickly stretched out his arms to hug her. Slow down, why are you in such a hurry? Shen Chuwei thought about it for a long time and couldn't remember what happened when she fell to the ground last night, but now, she felt something strange in her body. The strangeness was so familiar that she couldn't forget it. So you slept with Xiao Jinyan last night? And I stopped drinking, and I don't know if I was talking nonsense. When he looked at Xiao Jinyan again, he was too embarrassed to ask about last night. My concubine missed breakfast and lunch. It's a loss. Xiao Jinyan, why do you just remember to eat? Shen Chu touched his stomach slightly and said weakly, I am hungry. Xiao Jinyan, wash up first, then eat. Okay. Shen Chuwei took out her toiletries and started to wash up. Xiao Jinyan took advantage of Shen Chuwei's washing up to open the food box on the low table, took out the snacks inside and put them on the low table. Chengzi made meat buns and fried dough sticks early in the morning. This time, she was fully prepared. Although it was cold at this time, it tasted good. Xiao Jinyan then took out the tea set, brewed a cup of new tea, and poured a cup in front of Shen Chuwei. Washing up quickly, it was done in a short while. Shen Chuwei looked at the buns and fried dough sticks on the table and couldn't wait to eat them. Xiao Jinyan saw her wolfing down and reminded her, eat slowly. I know. Shen Chuwei responded, but her eating speed did not slow down at all. Seeing the new tea on the side, she took it up and drank a few sips, then picked up a fried dough stick and took a bite. Although it was not as delicious as it was just out of the pot, it was also delicious when you were hungry. Sichuan smelled the meat and called out, meow. Shen Chuwei lowered her eyes and glanced at Sichuan. Tongwei was a foodie and knew Sichuan too well. She picked up a meat bun and placed it in front of it, puffing her cheeks and saying, eat it. Sichuan was not polite and took a bite. When he ate the meat filling, he narrowed his blue eyes happily. Xiao Jinyan looked at the two foodies, one man and one cat, and looked at Shen Chuwei. Thinking of her behavior last night, he asked in a gentle voice, do you remember what happened last night? Good night, my dears. Begging for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets by acting cute. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 220. When Shen Chuwei heard about last night, her chewing slowed down. She secretly glanced at Xiao Jinyan, and when she saw him looking at her, she immediately looked away, feeling guilty. She must have done something earth-shattering after getting drunk last night, otherwise Xiao Jinyan wouldn't have mentioned it so seriously. She thought about it carefully, maybe, it might be nonsense. It's also possible that he shouted Xiao Jinyan's name. She asked carefully, Your Highness, I didn't do anything bad last night, did I? Xiao Jinyan said thoughtfully, you were very bold last night. Shen Chuwei wailed in her heart. She did something earth-shattering last night. She suddenly thought, could it be that she beat Xiao Jinyan herself? She carefully tested, how bold? Xiao Jinyan looked at her calmly, what do you think? Shen Chuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan, trying to find evidence that she beat him. Finally, she found traces on the white neck of Xiao Jinyan's moon-white collar. It seems that he hit her a little too hard, and she is so green now. Even if she doesn't remember what she did last night, she can guess that Xiao Jinyan wanted to sleep with her last night, but she was drunk and refused to obey, so she couldn't help but beat him. Xiao Jinyan is very good at this, so he easily made her obedient, and tossed her around in this way and that way. Shen Chuwei adheres to the idea that admitting mistakes and having a good attitude will be forgiven, and said sincerely, I accidentally drank too much last night, Your Highness, don't be angry, I promise that I will never drink too much again in the future. Xiao Jinyan looked at her serious face, which was a little different from her childish look last night. She was more bold after being drunk. I am not angry. Shen Shuwei heard the words, and her heart finally returned to its place. She couldn't help but praise Xiao Jinyan in her heart, saying that he would definitely be a wise ruler in the future. She looked at the half-sliced fried dough stick in her hand, hesitated for a long time, and then reluctantly handed it to him. Your Highness, do you want to eat fried dough sticks? Xiao Jinyan looked at her reluctant look and shook his head. You eat it, I'm not hungry. Shen Shuwei was waiting for the sentence, her eyebrows curved, then I won't be polite. As she said that, she handed it to her mouth and took a bite, eating with relish. When have you ever been polite? Xiao Jinyan looked at her eating, picked up the teacup in front of her and sipped the tea slowly. Sichuan finished a meat bun and licked his paws with satisfaction. Shen Shuwei swept away the snacks in front of her, drank 2 sips of tea with satisfaction, and the soreness in her body was reduced by half, and she felt a little lazy. She turned her head to look at Xiao Jinyan and found that he was reading a book again. She lowered her head and glanced at the words in the book. Wow, it was actually The Art of War. No wonder he was so absorbed in reading it every time. She held her chin with one hand and stroked the snowball with the other hand, and asked curiously, Your Highness, are you planning to lead the troops to fight? Xiao Jinyan said lightly, It's not because I want to lead the troops to fight that I have to read The Art of War. As the future crown prince, learning more will only be of great benefit. Shen Shuwei nodded, indicating that she understood. Being a crown prince is actually quite tiring. You get up earlier than a chicken and sleep later than a dog. Your body is exhausted at a young age. Your position is still being remembered by others, and your life is in danger from time to time. It's better to be an idle prince, comfortable and free. Xiao Jinyan paused after hearing this. He turned his head to look at Shen Shuwei, only to see her holding her chin and looking at him. Her eyes were still as pure as a child. Being in the royal family, not everything can be chosen by yourself. The strong prey on the weak, and you have to fight even if you don't want to. When Xiao Jinyan looked over, Shen Shuwei felt guilty, and always felt that Xiao Jinyan saw what she was thinking. After several days of travel, he finally arrived in Kyoto. Shen Shuwei leaned out of the car window, looking at the bustling streets, and couldn't help but sigh that time flies. After going out with Xiao Jinyan for a month, she still missed Xiun Pavilion and the little rabbits. More importantly, her own vegetable garden and chicken coop should be growing vigorously. Xiao Jinyan leaned on the low table, watching Shen Shuwei's actions without stopping her. Entering the palace and going directly to the East Palace. After getting off the carriage, Xiao Jinyan said, You go back to the Huan Palace first, I want to see my father. Shen Shuwei bowed, watched Xiao Jinyan leave, and then went back to the Huan Palace with Chengzi. Little brother, wait a minute. Qin Xiao ran all the way over. Chengzi didn't know how many times he was called little brother along the way. When he heard someone shouting stop little brother, he subconsciously stepped down and looked back in confusion, only to see Qin Xiao walking all the way over. She straightened her chest, What do you want me to do? Qin Xiao reached into his arms and took out a handkerchief, and handed it to Chengzi. Here, I'll give it back to you. Chengzi looked at the handkerchief in Qin Xiao's hand. His hands were big, and the handkerchief was folded neatly, like a piece of tofu. She hesitated and didn't reach out to take it. Seeing that Chengzi didn't take it, Qin Xiao handed it forward again. It's already washed. Chengzi looked up at Qin Xiao, blushed, and left with Shen Shuwei. Leaving only one sentence, give it to you. Qin Xiao saw the two running away, looked down at the handkerchief in his hand, and was in a dilemma. I, a grown man, don't need a handkerchief. Wei Qi came over, patted Qin Xiao on the shoulder and said, "What's wrong with you these 2 days? Why are you so weird?" When he saw the handkerchief in Qin Xiao's hand, he knew it was for a girl. "Qin Xiao, you are becoming more and more effeminate, using such a feminine thing." This was the third time Qin Xiao was called a mother-in-law by his good brother. No one could bear it. He grabbed Wei Kai's collar, and veins on his forehead jumped. "This is a gift from my little brother. It's not mine. Do you understand?" Wei Qi was startled by Qin Xiao's roar and nodded mechanically. "I understand. That's more like it." Qin Xiao let go of Wei Kai's collar with satisfaction. Wei Qi asked in a shocked tone, "When did you two get together?" In the end, Qin Xiao chased Wei Qi around the East Palace for several laps until Wei Qi begged for mercy. Back to the Hehuan Palace, Shen Shuwei saw a gray little rabbit running towards her as if to greet her as soon as she entered the room. But when she saw the snowball in Shen Shuwei's arms, she hurriedly stepped on the brakes and didn't dare to get close. Shen Shuwei looked at the little rabbit's body and found that it had gained some weight. "It's only been a month and it's so fat. You can only walk by rolling in the future." The little rabbit blinked twice, innocent as hell. On the second day after returning, concubine Su came to visit with a handkerchief waving. Seeing Shen Shuwei in the yard, she hurried over. "Shen Liangdi, have you heard? The queen wants to make Chang Liangdi the crown princess." Shen Shuwei had just had her period and felt uncomfortable. When she heard that Chang Liangdi wanted to make the crown prince, she asked, "When did it happen?" "It happened in March. A few days ago, Chang Liangdi's mother's family came to the palace to visit the queen and mentioned it, and the queen agreed to it." "Good afternoon, my dears. Begging for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets by acting cute.